In this session, we are going to look at some of the important organizations related to the environment at both national as well as international levels. Again, one topic from where you will see that many a times every year one question is being asked. So that's why you should know what these organizations are, what are the roles of these organizations, and especially the ones which are in news. The ones which are in news become much more important for you from the point of view of the prelims examination. So let's begin with some of the international organizations first. The first one is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES. First of all, it was drafted as a result of resolution adopted in 1963 at a meeting of members of International Union of Conservation of Nature, that is IUCN, something that we are just about to see. The aim of CITES is to ensure that international trade in specimens of wild animals and plants does not threaten the survival of the species in the wild. It is administered through the United Nations Environment Program, something again we'll see at the later stage, and it is legally binding on state parties to the convention, which are obliged to adopt their own domestic legislation to implement its goals. Then it classifies plants and animals according to 3 categories or appendices based on how they are threatened. So when it comes to Appendix 1, Appendix 1 includes about 1200 species that are threatened with the extinction or may have been affected by the trade. The next significant aspect of Appendix 1 is that commercial trade in wild caught specimens of these species is illegal. Some of the important Appendix 1 animals are red panda, tigers, Asiatic lion, leopards, jaguar, cheetah, Asian elephant, and dugong. So all these are important Appendix 1 animals under CITES. Then you have something called as Appendix 2. When it comes to Appendix 2, there are approximately 21,000 plants and animals here which are not threatened with extinction, but that might suffer a serious decline in number if trade is not restricted. So the first appendix is where if the trade is happening, if the hunting is happening, then there is a possibility of extinction of these animals or plants. In second appendix, what you get is that they are not threatened with extinction, but still might suffer very negative consequences of some sort if the trade is not restricted. The international trade in specimens of Appendix 2 species may be authorized by granting of an export permit or re-export certificate. Then you have Appendix 3 animals or plants, which includes approximately 170 species protected in at least one of the countries that is a CITES members and that has petitioned others for help in controlling the international trade in that species. These species are not necessarily threatened with extinction globally. So it might be the case for one country or maybe a group of countries, but it will not be the case for the entire world. So that's why it would come under Appendix 3. The trade in these species is only permitted with an appropriate export permit and a certificate of origin from the state of the member country who has listed the species. So it contains approximately 170 species. Then next, a very important organization, that is IUCN, or International Union for Conservation of Nature. So first of all, it is working in the field of nature conservation and sustainable use of natural resources. Then the most important point, what is the main role of it? It is involved in data gathering and analysis, research, field projects, advocacy, lobbying, and education. So all these things related to different organisms. The mission is to influence, encourage, and assist societies throughout the world to conserve nature and to ensure that any use of natural resources is equitable and ecologically sustainable. Then again, if you look at this point, it tries to influence the actions of governments, businesses, and other stakeholders by providing information and advice through lobbying and partnerships. Then another significant point about IUCN It is the only international observer organization in the UN General Assembly with expertise in issues concerning the environment. There is no other organization related to the environment which has an observer status in the General Assembly of the UN. It was involved in establishing of the Worldwide Fund, or commonly known as WWF, for nature and the World Conservation Monitoring Center. Now, the last point for which this is most famous for, it produces the red list of threatened species and the IUCN red list of ecosystems. So what IUCN does is that it classifies the species of plants and animals into various categories for the purpose of their conservation. Now, if you look at this, first there are 9 categories that exist. First is extinct. So extinct would be where no known individual is remaining. Then you have extinct in the wild, known only to survive in captivity or as a naturalized population outside its historic range. Then you have critically endangered species which have extremely high risk of extinction in the wild. Then you have endangered species which have high risk of extinction in the wild. Then you have vulnerable species which have high risk of endangerment in the wild. Then after that you have near threatened category which are likely to become endangered in the near future. Then you have least concern, which are the lowest risk animals or plants, does not qualify for more at risk category. Widespread and abundant taxa are included in this category. Then apart from that, you have the data deficient category, where you don't have enough data to make an assessment of its risk of extinction. Then you have not evaluated category, which has not been evaluated yet against the criteria. So these are the 9 criteria that exist. And if you look at this diagram, first, if we take all the species that exist, either you have evaluated them or you have not evaluated them. So if you have not evaluated them, it comes under the any category. If it has been evaluated, then what we see is whether adequate data is available or adequate data is not available. So if there is no adequate data, you call it data deficient or double D. And if adequate data is present, then in that case you have 3 categories that you will see. First category is this, which is least concerned and near threatened. Then after that you have this category. These 3 are called as threatened species: critically endangered, endangered and vulnerable. All 3 are called as threatened categories. So if UPSC asks you which of the following is considered under threatened category of IUCN, then in that case you have to make sure that you mark anything that has these 3 categories. And then finally you have extinct and extinct in the wild category. So extinction risk, if you talk about, this has the least extinction risk, and extinction risk is increasing in this direction. Then the species, the categorization that we are talking about, it happens through these kind of criteria. First, the rate of decline, the population size, the area of geographic distribution and degree of population, and distribution fragmentation. These are the 4 criteria based on which the categorization is done. Then the next important organization that you have is TRAFFIC, the Wildlife Trade Monitoring Network, or known as TRAFFIC, non-governmental organization working globally on trade of wild animals and plants in the context of both biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. It is a joint program of Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF, and IUCN. So WWF plus IUCN. Remember this fact. Then if you look at this point, its mission is to ensure that trade in the wild plants and animals is not a threat to the conservation of nature, investigates and analyzes wildlife trends, patterns, impacts, and drivers to provide the leading knowledge base on trade in wild animals and plants. The next is Zoological Survey of India. It was established in 1916 to promote survey exploration and research on various aspects of animal taxonomy in the Indian subcontinent, seeks to advancement of knowledge on animal taxonomy. Activities are coordinated by the Conservation and Survey Division under Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change. And then if you look at the primary objectives that Zoological Survey of India has, first, exploring, surveying and inventorying and monitoring of the fauna diversity, preparation of red data book, fauna of India and fauna of states, maintenance and development of national zoological collections, and finally training, capacity building, human resource development. So these are the primary objectives of Zoological Survey of India. So under the secondary categories, the first one is GIS and remote sensing studies on recorded animal diversity as well as on threatened species. Then environmental impact studies are done, maintenance of museum at headquarters and regional centers, development of environmental information systems and sites centers. Then collaborative research programs on biodiversity with other organizations in India and abroad. So this is Zoological Survey of India. Then you have Botanical Survey of India, which was set up in 1890 to survey the plant resources of the Indian Empire, and this was done by the British government at that point of time. So if you look at this point, in 1954 the government recognized Botanical Survey of India with these objectives. First, undertaking intensive floristic surveys, then collecting, identifying and distributing the material that may be of use to educational and research institutions, and finally acting as the custodian of the authentic collections in well-planned herbatia and documenting plant resources in the form of local, district, state and national flora. So custodian of authentic collection, collecting, identifying and distributing the materials that would be of use in educational and research institutions, and finally undertaking intensive floristic surveys. Then the next one that we have is National Tiger Conservation Authority. First, it is a statutory body under the Union Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and then the most important work is that it addresses the administrative as well as ecological concerns for conserving tigers by providing a statutory basis for protection of tiger reserves, and it ensures enforcing of guidelines for tiger conservation and monitoring of compliance of the same. The main functions of National Tiger Conservation Authority is first to ensure normative standards in tiger reservation management, then preparation of reserve specific tiger conservation plan, laying down annual audit report before the Parliament, instituting state level steering committee under the chairmanship of the Chief Minister and establishment of Tiger Conservation Foundation, and finally according approval for declaring new tiger reserves in the country. Then you have Animal Welfare Board of India. Most importantly, is a statutory body, and the most important functions of the board is first to oversee animal welfare organization by granting them recognition if they meet the guidelines. Then it appoints key people to the positions of animal welfare officers who serve as key point of contact between the people, government and enforcing agencies. Then apart from that, it provides financial assistance to the recognized animal welfare organizations who submit the applications to the board. Then the last one which we need to see here is United Nations Environment Program, one of the most important organizations again in the entire world. So first of all, it is the leading global environmental authority that sets the global environmental agenda, promotes the coherent implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development within the United Nations system, and serves as an authoritative advocate for the global environment. So all the activities basically are being carried out by UNEP. Its mission is to provide leadership and encourage partnership in caring for the environment by inspiring, informing and enabling the nations and people to improve their quality of life without compromising that of the future generations. So, if you look at this, there are 7 broad thematic areas under which it functions. They are climate change, disasters, ecosystem management, environmental governance, chemical and waste, resource efficiency, and environment under review. And finally, all the conventions, basically most of the conventions that you know about, all the ones which we have already studied, all they have been a part of UNEP. For example, whether you take the CBD or you talk about sites, then the Basel Convention, Vienna Convention, Montreal Protocol, the Convention on Migratory Species, all these that we have already seen in the previous chapter, all these are actually activities of UNEP. So, with this, actually, we come to the end of this chapter, a very highly factual chapter, so a lot of memorizing from your side will be required here. So, all the notes that you have, all the things that you have seen, ensure that you remember the important points that we have discussed in this chapter. Because it being a factual chapter, you at least need to go through it twice or thrice before you go to the examination. So, please go through everything that we had just learned. Thank you.